You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the 8th of May. White flight, white minority, lost migrants, less violence and more money. Metropolitan Police misconduct figures released with no mention of officers charged. Human rights. Whose rights? Criminals, that's who. EU lifts oil embargo in Syria, buys directly from Al Qaeda. Just 9% of Swedes support euro. British tourists charged £54 for just 4 ice creams in Rome cafe. Bangladeshi war crimes court indicts NHS director. Buddhists are wising up to jihad, BBC doesn't like it. China food scandal, rat meat sold as lamb meat. Thought for the day, a nation divided. And finally, not for Valentine's Day. UK news. White flight, white minority, lost migrants, less violence, more money. MSN UK reports white Britons could be a minority in the UK by 2070, according to David Coleman, Professor of Demography at the Oxford University. Professor Coleman, in a briefing written for the Migration Observatory, said that around 25% of all births were now from foreign-born mothers in England and Wales, France and Germany. The briefing also noted how only 45% of London residents ticked white British in the 2011 census. Then we have the Daily Mail telling us how rise of white flight is creating a segregated UK. Study reveals white Britons are retreating from areas dominated by ethnic minorities. The study by the Demos think tank found, at least according to the Daily Mail, that census figures show white Britons are leaving areas where they are a minority. Think tank says survey reveals spiral of white British demographic decline. Ex-Human Rights Commission Chair Trevor Phillips says findings should make us anxious and were not good news for the cause of integration. Nearly half of ethnic minorities live where whites make up less than 50%. Just 800 of 8,850 council wards where population is 98% white. 620,000 white British Londoners left the capital between 2001 and 2011, making white Britons a minority in the country's largest city and capital. We also have the Daily Mail telling us so many migrants flooded into Britain from Eastern Europe that authorities were unable to count them. Whitehall has admitted. Official migration figures missed out nearly 500,000 Eastern European migrants who came to the UK after their countries joined the EU in 2004, according to a paper published by the Office for National Statistics. The scale of the population was only revealed in the 2011 census, which showed the population was even bigger than estimated. And finally, the Japan Times, in Immigration Shows No Impact on UK Violence, reports the London School of Economics says crime in British neighbourhoods that have experienced mass immigration from Eastern Europe over the last 10 years has fallen significantly. Rates of burglary, vandalism and car theft all dropped following the arrival of migrants from Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary and 7 other countries after they joined the European Union in 2004. Rates of property crimes were significantly higher in areas that experienced an influx of asylum seekers from the late 1990s onwards. Immigration had no impact on levels of violent crime on British streets. The relationship between the arrival of thousands of foreigners and levels of violence was close to zero. Brian Bell, a research fellow at the LSE, said, "The view that foreigners commit more crime is not true. The truth is that immigrants are just like natives. If they have a good job and a good income, they don't commit crime." The findings came days after a report revealed that the UK is becoming more peaceful, with rates of violent crime and murder falling more rapidly in the past decade than any other Western European country. The UK Peace Index, produced by the Institute for Economics and Peace, found that the violent crime rate fell by a quarter between 2003 and 2012, a period of relatively high immigration. However, The Guardian, in Crime Experts Attack Deceptive Home Office Figures Showing Fall in Offences, reports Marion Fitzgerald, a visiting professor of criminology at the Crime and Justice Centre, University of Kent, as saying, Claims that Britain has never been safer are misleading, according to a study that accuses the government of massaging official crime figures. The police service has been driven for nearly 15 years by the imperative to demonstrate year-on-year reductions in crime. Our World Today writer says, official reports are nothing more than propaganda and portray the official position desired by those who funded the report. The only crime I've fallen victim to was when I worked for a service of the Home Office and had my wallet lifted as I crossed the street. This was shortly after the Romanians were allowed free movement across our borders and was traced to a Romanian gang of pickpockets operating out of Lambeth. If you want more of the two-faced side of government propaganda, just look at the report from The Independent titled "Wanted More Immigrants to Boost British Economy" back in 2011, where the Office for Budget Responsibility believed George Osborne's economic strategy rests on continued high levels of immigration to Britain, in contrast to the Conservatives' policy of cutting net migration down to the tens of thousands, and that, if ministers were to succeed in reducing immigration down to their target, the UK's growth would be damaged, the OBR's economists believe, acknowledging the role that immigration plays in Britain's economic health. At the time, Jonathan Porters, director of the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, said that OBR would have to revise down its growth and deficit forecasts as less immigration would mean fewer workers paying tax. Well, he was wrong. Less immigration means more Brits working, more taxes paid and more money staying in Britain and not going abroad. Metropolitan Police misconduct figures released with no mention of officers charged. Scotland Yard has started releasing these figures every quarter to show that they are holding their officers to account and boost confidence. 42 Metropolitan Police officers and staff were disciplined for misconduct in the first 2 months of this year. The figures for January and February show 19 officers were fired, 10 received a formal reprimand, 8 resigned before a hearing was held and 5 received a written warning. The complete figures for 2012 were also released, which showed 232 misconduct hearings were held and 96 police officers or staff were dismissed as a result. Offences for which officers were sacked include internet paedophile activity, accessing the national database to spy on an ex-partner, an assault on their partner, making inappropriate comments to colleagues, eating food in a supermarket without paying, making racist comments to colleagues, holding an ex-partner's 10-year-old in a headlock, using a Met vehicle for personal use, kicking and punching a detained person in the face, 2 Met staff for drinking and driving, operating an eBay account using Metropolitan Police Service mailing for delivery, misconduct falling under honesty and integrity, and other. Alleged offences for which officers were allowed to resign before face misconduct hearings include sending abusive text messages to a woman, having a relationship with a police cadet who can be aged between 13 and 18 years old, inappropriate comments made on social networking site, no mention made of officers charged. Human rights. Whose rights? Criminals, that's who. 6 million DNA samples to be destroyed and all new samples must now be destroyed within 6 months. The Daily Mail warns police say killers will go free in crazy move to destroy all DNA samples after 6 months, as police will no longer be able to use familial DNA testing to narrow down suspects using forensic material from relatives. The Protection of Freedoms Act 2012, legislation championed by Nick Clegg in response to a European human rights ruling, calls for DNA samples to be taken from individuals who are not charged or are subsequently acquitted to be destroyed. In another story, the Daily Mail warns human rights that put children at risk by the 2010 Supreme Court ruling that sex offenders should be allowed to appeal against staying on the sex offenders register for life. The Daily Mail goes on to report, in just 7 months police in England and Wales have removed at least 43 serious offenders from the register, approving almost half of applications at a rate of 1 every 5 days. Chillingly, they include 8 rapists and 27 child sex attackers, with a surge of similar applications expected as many more criminals become eligible to appeal. More worrying still, appeals are conducted in secret, with each case signed off by a middle-ranking police officer. And since the identities of those applying to be removed are not revealed, the public can't come forward with evidence against them. From the Daily Mail we learn more of human rights secrecy as rapist in legal battle to live where he chooses is granted anonymity by judge. When the Ministry of Justice refused his application to move from England to another part of the UK, he appealed under Article 8 of the Human Rights Act the right to a private and family life. The violent and notorious rapist has been granted anonymity by High Court Justice Mr Underhill. The Daily Mail also gives us 2 more foreign rioters foil attempts to deport them because of their rights to a family life under Human Rights Act, and the Telegraph reports it as the foreign rioters we cannot deport because of their right to family life. In these reports we are told 2 senior immigration judges, Henry Latter and Andrew Grubb, have allowed Nigerian-born Ubong Luki Nkanta was jailed in November 2011 for 18 months for burglary during the riots in London, and a Zimbabwean who can only be named as TS after senior immigration judges granted him anonymity despite the fact criminal courts had allowed him to be named. World at 8 states. Will these new-found freedoms apply to members of nationalist parties arrested in the future for minor misdemeanours? I think not. They will have their lives and their families' lives ruined for much lesser crimes than those highlighted, as they are English patriots. European news. EU lifts oil embargo on Syria, buys directly from Al-Qaeda. It was recently reported in the Associated Press article that the European Union would be lifting its oil embargo on Syria in an effort to help fund what it calls rebels operating there. So true to form, the European Union on Monday lifted its oil embargo on Syria to provide more economic support to the forces fighting to oust President Bashar al-Assad's regime. The decision will allow for crude exports from rebel-held territory, the import of oil and gas production technology and investments in the Syrian oil industry, the EU said in a statement. World at 8 comments. You can see that the EU, riddled with diversity-ridden Marxists, is doing all it can to create a fundamentalist Islamic republic in what was once a fairly democratic Islamic country. Just 9% of Swedes support the euro. Support for the euro has dropped to a record low 9% in Sweden, according to an SOM survey out on Monday. The Swedes have long been critical of moving the EU towards a kind of United States of Europe, but now just 11% say it's a good idea. British tourists charged £54 for just 4 ice creams in Roman cafe. When in Rome, it's tempted to try the city's world-famous ice cream. But some British tourists were left with a nasty aftertaste, a £54 bill, following their complaints over being charged £13.50 each for their takeaway cones. An Italian politician has called for a clampdown on such extortionate prices. World news. Bangladeshi war crimes court indict the NHS director. A war crimes court in Bangladesh has indicted Chowdhury Muhyiddin, a British Muslim leader, for his alleged role in the murder of top intellectuals during the country's 1971 Liberation War. Udin, who the Daily Mail describes as one of Britain's most important Muslim leaders, is the director of Muslim spiritual care provision in the NHS and is also chairman of the multi-faith group for healthcare chaplaincy, is alleged to have abducted, tortured and killed 18 journalists, academics and doctors during the bloody War of Independence in Bangladesh in 1971. World at 8 says, if the cap fits, wear it. Will he be deported to serve his time in his homeland, or cower here like a coward? Buddhists are wising up to jihad. The BBC doesn't like it. Christina McIntosh, writing for the New English Review, provides an interesting insight into our BBC. The BBC News magazine, Why Are Buddhist Monks Attacking Muslims?, is an extraordinary let's feel sorry for the poor little Muslims who are being attacked by the big bad Buddhists propaganda piece that manages to spend a lot of time criticising Buddhists and Christians while stepping delicately around the oceans of blood, towers of skulls and mountains of corpses, the broad line of blood, as William Gladstone once famously put it, that has accompanied Islam from the very beginning throughout its entire history to the present day. I would be fascinated to know, however, exactly who chose the photograph that heads the article. A Burmese Buddhist monk at a demonstration holding up a hand-lettered placard that states bluntly, defiantly and entirely truthfully, "The world is not only for Muslims." For that placard reveals that at least some Buddhists have fully grasped Islam's core agenda: to Islamise the whole world, which agenda is in turn justified by the extraordinary thesis that the whole world and everything in it really belongs as of a right to Muslims, and that all non-Muslims, non-Muslims, have no right whatsoever to either life or property. World at 8 states. I wish it were a case of just letting them alone, but it isn't and never has been. Leave a Muslim alone and he'll take over your house, your family, your culture, your religion and your country. If only the West would open its eyes instead of its banks and its countries. Even the Buddhists, who revere all life, recognise that Islam is a great evil that must be challenged or stopped. China food scandal: rat meat sold as lamb meat. Mike Adams, the health ranger and editor of Natural News, writes, Chinese authorities say they broke up a 900-person criminal ring that harvested meat from rats and other animals to be modified and sold as lamb meat. This rat meat appeared in markets in Jiangsu province and Shanghai. To date, Natural News is the only publication to tell the full story on why this is happening. Perhaps that's because I speak a fair amount of Chinese and previously lived in Asia. I know the Chinese and Taiwanese cultures better than most. And the simple truth behind all that is that China is a nation of spiritually void atheists who have no morals or ethics. Religion is outlawed in China, and as a result there is absolutely no moral compass taught to the Chinese people. Remember, Chinese is a communist military dictatorship, essentially a police state. World at 8 states. Having always admired the Chinese, at least the non-communist ones, I can see what Mike Adams means. The old Chinese worshipped their ancestors and various gods and goddesses. This gave them some moral compass. If you don't believe in anything other than the state, you are morally bankrupt as a people. So for all of you visiting China, be careful, be very careful. The other meat quoted is more than likely a stolen cat or stray dog, and let's face it, Chinese cooking, like Indian, covers all in a blanket of spices and herbs. You can't be sure of what you're eating even in the UK, let alone China. Thought for the day: a nation divided? Great Britain has been a divided nation since 1066 and in fact wasn't even too united against the Normans either. In fact, looking at our past history, we've never acted as one against any unwanted foe that has entered our country, but just managed to get it together for the Third Reich, who didn't. But even then, if one's honest, the Scots didn't like the English don't trust the Welsh, and Ireland has always had a very thin time of it. And of course everyone on these isles disliked our allies, the Americans. We've always hated and been vaguely envious of the French, disliked the Spanish for their treatment of animals. The Italians have always preferred the Germans, as have the Greeks, and Portugal is just a bloody nuisance, as are Malta and Gibraltar. So with that history of untogetherness, what chance do we stand in actually uniting anyone? You might be right in thinking sod all, really. We have a north-south divide that borders on the ridiculous for such a small island, and have extended that to yet another small island just off our shores, Ireland or Ayr, just to be safe. It would seem that the great British public have taken on board the successive government's mantra of "a nation divided is a nation easily conquered," and they'd be right. We are being conquered, and in a very clever but not so subtle way. Maggie Thatcher tried to instil a sense of pride in this country, but it was discouraged heartily by the socialists, who always resent a people who want to be upwardly mobile. The socialist mantra is the diversity motto: keep everyone down a level so no one feels different or feels they must improve. Thus we have truly become a nation of shopkeepers, but unfortunately they're all foreign ones. We have the European Union against us, we have our own establishment against us, and the global recession ain't helping. But the greatest thing against nationalism are the people we hope to save. Not the country or the land, but the people. Our very own tribes are being used against their own tribes in many ways. The first of all is of course negative and positive information, and for that we can highlight the media and television. How can a people who should be concerned over the state of the country with its massive and continuing invasion of foreigners face up to the fact when most, if not all, the programmes directed at the sheeples are totally multi-ethnic, but pushed in the faces of babies and toddlers? Then the poor little creatures get sent to a multi-ethnic school which is, depending on their catchment areas, often fully ethnic, and in which they won't learn their own language, history, culture or religion, but will have more than a passing acquaintance with Islam, Hinduism and whatever passes for diversity nowadays. They will also have more than a passing knowledge of sexual matters and the morals of today, which are in fact wholly in favour of same-sex so-called marriage and wholly against what used to be a fairly normal family setup of man, woman and children. In short, there is a total dictatorship within their education systems which, compared to other countries, beggars belief. You can go, say, to Spain or India and you'll learn about Spanish and Indian history, not English history, and that's okay with me and should be okay with other parents, but they still send their kids to diversity-ridden state schools with their eyes wide shut. So a countrywide indoctrination starts in the cradle for our British sheeples. Follow it up with a Frankfurt School of Indoctrination in the so-called higher levels of education, like socialist-ridden newly appointed unis, and wham bam, thank you ma'am, you have your own fresh and divisive generation all ready made to go into the melting pot of our once great land, and produce more little socialist sheeples, or of course not, as they might be either too poor to marry or still finding themselves aged 40 odd. The English personae is not united or family-minded, and during modern times has never been so. What the new diverse education systems don't do, the old class system will. Despite it being declared legally dead some years ago, believe me, it ain't, and it's the only thing hanging on by a thread that stands against multiculturalism, which is why ambitious Asians especially veer towards the Conservative parties to get ahead in certain areas and Labour in others. In fact, the Asians, both Muslim and Hindu, have a class system that's second to none, and they brought it over here to take over from our old English system. I have a quote from Cicero and a paragraph from our French correspondent, which I shall read. This article should be going on our website in its entirety. Titled Sabotage, Treason and the Enemy Within. A nation can survive its fools, even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gates freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. For the traitor appears not a traitor, he speaks in accents familiar to his victims, and he wears their face and their arguments. He appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of the city. He infects the body politic so it can no longer resist. A murderer is less to fear. The traitor is the plague. Cicero, Roman statesman and lawyer. The fantasy of diversity and multiculturalism promoted by the left is that different cultures will merge and society will benefit. It's a nice concept that works fairly well for every other ethnic culture except one, Muslims. Look at London, Paris and Brussels. As Muslims move in, the white population flees, because Islam is a supremacist culture, with a preponderance of entitlement to whores and polygamists who prefer to live off the largesse of taxpayers. Not to mention misogynists, rapists and criminal thugs. These are the types of people who should not in any case be allowed further entry into Europe or any Western-oriented culture. These are the enemy within, and the barbarians at the gate. Our French correspondent also makes a concise comparison of the Roman amphitheatres of old, where the senators tried to appease the masses with bread and games, with the attitude today of treating the sheeples in the same way. Give them reality TV and something to hate, normally patriotism or nationalism, cheap food, available drink and drugs, and let them stew. Or rather, let them eat cake and stop thinking for themselves altogether. Of course, if a few are left having an opinion, bring in more foreigners to vote or breed them out, make travelling or meeting difficult, and stifle freedom of speech for certain tribes. There, job done. Got the idea yet? If you haven't cottoned on, there was a 2-page spread in the Sunday Mail of Blackpool and hen and stag parties, and although I'm anything but a prude, I am a southerner of course and of another tribe, but those pictures of those girls and boys made me feel so ashamed to be English that I nearly converted to Islam. In truth they were compared to Babylon, but I'm sure that Babylon was a lot classier and better looking, as indeed were probably Sodom and Gomorrah. The main point of these pictures was to denigrate British youth, and it did a very good job of doing so. I challenge anyone looking at those pictures to say, oh, the youth of today having a good time. My thoughts were that they should all be put in burqas and made to breed. And I'm anti-Islamic, but these pictures brought home just how far standards, that old-fashioned word, have slipped, and the young sheeples are falling into the pits that have been dug for them by the establishment, who don't want a thinking, concise and sober generation because they'd know what's happening and try to prevent it, and that doesn't fit in with the way our powers that be want our children to act at all. It must be obvious to even the thickest youngster that if you're white and come from a background that is middle, working class or challenged, you will not be educated and looked after as the state promised to do so many years ago, with free comprehensive education and university entry for all not completely subnormal. You'll not be given a job because with immigration, computers and the global recession there won't be any for your kind in your own country. You will not be able to marry and have children because it's been made impossible for you to afford it. You're white, remember? Also, if you exhibit any patriotic feelings, forget them and become a socialist, then you might stand a chance of running an outreach programme for Somalis in outer London, if you're very lucky. Another problem is that all our youngsters and many of our generation before have been disillusioned deliberately by a very clever play on our political systems and parties. Governments realised in the 60s that the colonisation of our country would take time and that although slow to start with, it would gain momentum the more converts they had. But nature fills a vacuum and they decided to work against any form of patriotism they could find with a vehemence entirely backed by the media, who after all had just finished a world war against fascism. So the time was ripe for the socialists to emerge, as indeed they did. Under the all-encompassing caring umbrella of diversity, equal rights and multiculturalism, prior to this in the 50s, Labour brought over the West Indians to fill the jobs that had been left unfilled after the war, alias the non-professional jobs in the Docklands, which led to terrible strikes and trouble in the East End of London. They solved that by literally closing down the East End docks and building upmarket residential housing there. The rest of the East End they left open to massive immigration in the oncoming years. Problem solved. Diversity was not to be ignored or unwanted by the sheeples populace. They solved the problem of new generations by the methods previously highlighted, continually hammered the National Front and later of course the British National Party. Very cleverly, around 5 years ago, the papers built up and advertised the BNP in a way they'd never done, but this was a sort of Damocles waiting to drop. In doing so, they appeared to tell the sheeples that we would be in power soon and what would happen to their mixed marriages and the friends they'd made who were of a then ethnic minority. Whenever something is printed, the sheeples always relate it to them and their problems. And many people, thinking we were accepted by the establishment, were frightened into acting in a perverse way, against their country and patriotism and into the I deserve better mode. It's this mode, coupled with continuous propaganda, that's brought England to the state it's in now. No one thinks any of the three main political parties are different, and UKIP is a government-backed siphon for sheeples who either cannot understand or know the message it tells. We will say what you want to hear and promise what cannot be given, but it has served a purpose for the moment in pushing back patriotism in the United Kingdom. Patriotism is a dirty word, farmed out to the education authorities, the police, the legal systems and the people as a word never to be uttered of, or if spoken, met with the good old Trotskyite word, racism. And that frightens more sheeples than being under Islamic rule, which in itself is very sad. How can we, the people, pull out of this nosedive of self-obsessed selfishness induced by clever politicians in order to save what we have left? How long can the enemy within bring the enemies without into our midst? How long before we sober up and read the writing on the wall? In the words of the Old Testament, the moving hand having writ moves on. Or, in the words of Omar Khayam, a Persian poet, indeed the idols I have loved so long have done my credit in men's eyes such wrong, have downed my honour in a shallow cup and sold my reputation for a song. And finally, love beyond the grave. Skeletons discovered holding hands in coffin together. It's been reported in the Telegraph that love can last beyond the grave, a fact which shocked archaeologists working in Cluj-Napoca, Romania, discovered. They discover skeletons of a couple buried together holding hands whilst excavating the courtyard of a former Dominican monastery. It's believed the double grave dated back to the Middle Ages. The bodies were buried somewhere between 1450 and 1550. Adrian Rousseau from the Cluj-Napoca Institute of Archaeology and History of Art said, "It's a mystery and rare for such burials at that time. We can see that the man has suffered a severe injury that left him with a broken hip, from which he probably died. Because of that fact, the young woman obviously died at the same time and was presumably healthy. We're speculating that she possibly died of a broken heart at the loss of her partner." Mr Rousseau added, "Suicide is unlikely as it is regarded as a sin, and it's unlikely she would have been buried at such a holy place if that was the case. They were obviously buried together as a tribute to the love they had for each other." The remains of a child were also found in the grave, but archaeologists believe that may not have been linked to the pair. This presenter says, "These Romanians aren't too bright, are they? This couple were found in an old monastery. A child was found in the grave as well. Now, call me odd, but the most obvious explanation is that the man was a monk, fell in love, had a child and fell foul of the church for doing so. She probably died of being smothered, as did the child, and the one thing the brothers did do was put the entire little family in the same grave holding hands. Very sweet and very tragic. I don't think political correctness mattered in those days, and I hope Rousseau leaves them in peace. A baby would not be buried alone in a stranger's grave, would it?" You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night.